Hello, everybody, and welcome to Success Computer Consulting's Microsoft Power BI user group. We'll get started here shortly. Just wanted to do some housekeeping and let you guys know who will be presenting today. So today we have Success Computer Consulting CTO Brandon Knorr, joined by our business integration analyst, Alex Hapka, and they will be demystifying Power BI dashboards and showing you how to drive knowledge from data discovery. So this event is about an hour and a half. Reason being is that a lot of it is going to be demo, and we want to leave you with 5 tips to hit the ground running with Microsoft Power BI. So our goal is that you leave this event feeling confident that you can start running Power BI dashboards on your own. A little bit of housekeeping. So in the Teams Live event, there is a Q&A panel, and that should be displayed on the right-hand side. And if you have any questions throughout the demo, feel free to publish those questions using this tool, and we'll either address them throughout the demo or we'll get to them at the end of the event if we can't address them during the demo. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Brandon Knorr. He's going to kick off the event. So bear with us as we switch screens here.
Okay, hopefully everybody can see my screen. If I get maybe a thumbs up in the chat or something, that'd be great.
It looks like you're live, Brandon.
Awesome, thank you, appreciate the confirmation there. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. Again, I'm Brandon Knorr, the CTO of Success Computer Consulting, and really, a lot of my role here is, thinking into the future and looking from a strategy perspective, but also part of my responsibilities is building out our data platform. And we leverage a number of the tools that you're going to see today, specifically around the Microsoft Power Platform. So first, let's maybe take just a high level of what to expect today. There's going to be a couple of presenters, myself and Alex Hapka. And we're going to try to take you through a little bit of a journey. Start with raw data, and then introduce you to maybe some old tools, make them new again, maybe some features you didn't know you had access to already. And then Alex will take you through kind of a modern data visualization with Power BI. Now, my part's going to be pretty small up front here, and then Alex is going to deep dive into Power BI. And then at the end here, we'll wrap up. We'll give you some 5 tips on what we wish we knew when we were starting, and then Q&A. Now, feel free to ask questions. I think Vanessa and team is going to be monitoring the chat, so feel free to ask questions along the way. We're happy to answer them, but we'll leave some time, hopefully a little bit, for questions also. So let's just jump in a little bit and really kind of set the stage here. From a data analysis process, it really comes down to 3 phases, and it's really about going to get data, processing it or calculating and analyzing the data, and then presenting it to users and visualizing that data. But if you've ever gone through this process, you'll know that they're not equal parts. It looks actually more like this, where you spend a lot of time going to get the data, transforming it, and even cleaning it up a little bit. And then the other parts become a lot easier. It's almost self-service at that point. And again, you'll see from Alex a little bit later how Microsoft's making that really easy. In my experience, when you look at a data analysis process, this phase 1 is really where a lot of companies' data projects kind of die on the vine. It just gets too difficult to go get the data. And so I really want to kind of take a look at maybe some tools that will help shrink this and make it a little easier and automate some of this. And I don't know if you have access to a little tool out there called Excel. It's been around for, I don't know, 40 years, as long as I've been in the business, 22 years. And one of the features in it is called Power Query. And Power Query is and I'm just reading off a Microsoft site here, is a data connection technology that enables you to discover content, combine and refine data sources to meet your analysis needs. A lot of people don't realize that they actually have access to this. It's been around since 2010. In Excel 2010 and 2013, it was known as Power Query, but you had to add it in. It was an add-in. It wasn't there by default. In 2016 and higher, it's actually built in by default, and it's actually called Get and Transform. So a little bit of a naming change there. It's still Power Query in the background. There's a lot you can do with this. So some of the key benefits is you can connect to data. Now, not just one data source, you can connect to many different data sources. So some of these data sources might be in the cloud, they might be just a website, they might be on-prem. So there's a lot of different ways that you can connect to data. And then you can transform that data. So as you're getting that data and you're pulling it in, you can transform it. Combining the data, if there's different data sources, you can pull it together. This used to be really expensive. You'd have to build data warehousing to actually do this type of work. But it's built into Excel and some of the newer tools. And you'll see how these look very similar across the different tools. And then lastly, what do we want to do with data? We want to share it. We want people to consume it. We want to get in the hands of decision makers. And so that's a big piece of this too. So without further ado, that's not death by PowerPoint, but let's take a little bit of an example of how you can use Power Query. Now, I'm going to use Power Query in a very simple way. It's a very simple demo, but it's a demo it's an actual solution I've built for a customer, and it's very simple but useful, and I think it shows the versatility of Power Query. So let me just switch my screen really quick. I'm going to stop sharing for just a second. Oops, okay, there we go. There we go. All right, so now we have an Excel here. And again, this is just normal Excel, but I want to call your attention, and I'll kind of zoom in here, to the Data tab. Inside the Data tab, there is this corner that most people ignore. And again, this is the Get and Transform Data. I'm using the Office 365 version of Excel. And there's a drop down here for Get Data, and there's a ton of different sources we can pull data from in here. Azure, on-prem databases, online services. And just for ease of use, I'm going to open the Power Query editor just so you can kind of see the whole process. If you click on one of these, it'll just walk you through the process in a more wizard-driven, but the Power Query editor is kind of what I want to show you here. All right, just waiting for it to load. Let me close my PowerPoint because the system seems to be chugging along. There we go. Okay, so now all I want to do is draw your attention to this new source in the corner here. Again, it's going to be very similar to what we just looked at as the different file databases and different sources. But I want to call your attention to the folder. Now, this is kind of a cool feature. What it's going to allow us to do is monitor a folder, and when something in that folder changes, it's going to ingest that content. And now I'm going to show you the folder, if I can. Again, my computer's chugging a little bit here. the demo gods are not shining on me this morning. All right. There we go. All right. So I just want to show you this folder. Inside this folder, I want to call your attention to the import data. And in the import data, I have just a text file. It's called a CSV. It has a bunch of sales data in it. So I'm going to copy this. Into here if I can. There we go. And we're going to see it come up with a kind of a wizard and walk us through how to actually this isn't going well here. Sorry, it's a computer is really upset right now. Let's maybe see if I can get to the next page. That was just a listing of the file itself. I want to get to the actual data. Okay, very interesting. Try it one more time, and then we'll go over to my backup file, because we know how demos go sometimes. Please, demo god, shine on us. Nope, no shining. Okay. That's interesting. Let me do this real quick. I'm going to stop sharing and then reshare a completed folder so then we can kind of talk through this instead of get hung up on the walkthrough. So let's go here. And let's go here. Okay, from a Power Query perspective, we were able to walk through a few steps here. And let me see if I can pull this up. I think I'm still having some problems here. Good. Okay, I'm gonna close this. Sorry about this, folks. Again, the demo gods are not shining on us. I'm going to stop sharing for just a second and then try to open it and make sure it's not Teams causing this issue. Here we go. Okay, I'm going to share again. Okay, let's try this one more time and then we'll move on if it doesn't work. So let me quickly catch up here. Quick these relative terms sometimes. So I'd really like to show you how this works and flows into Power BI. All right, this is looking much better. Okay, so this is just a listing of the file, and I'm going to go into, I spoke too soon. Evaluating the query. So now it's kind of churning through that data and trying to understand it a little bit. It's going to do some things for me. So it looks at the the file, and then it actually goes through and it says, okay, I think the file looks like this, and kind of eyeballing this, it looks good to me. So I'm not going to spend too much time here. You're really looking for data smashed together and not looking right, but that looked nicely in columns. Okay, so now we have it in Power Query here, and this is a Power Query editor. And what it's done for us is it's actually walked through some steps, and it's documented those steps inside of Power Query. So it grabs the source file and makes some changes. Now, some of the changes I want to point out here is more data type changes. So it looked at the different columns here and said, hey, this looks like it's a text file or a text field. And if I move over here, then it looks like, oh, hey, there's a date field. I make that a data type, okay? But there's a couple that it didn't do well. I know this because I tested this before. And it made these dollars here, where it's revenue and cost and price, it made them more of just a decimal versus the currency. So let's change that real quick. Oh, sorry. I'm just going to highlight, holding down Shift, all of those, and then I'm going to change it to currency. And so here's an interesting question. This interesting question, and again, this works in Excel, a tool you probably already have, and it works in the same way, same editor and everything as in Power BI. This is really asking, do you want to create a new step, or do you want to change the current step? And we want to change all the data types in one step, so I'm just going to say replace the current step. And so over here, it just updated the change data type step in this process, okay? So one other feature I want to really call out here is the ability to create data. So as you're transforming this, you're going to be able to create some data. And I just want to add a column. And in here, I'm just going to call this gross margin, maybe. And just, this is very Excel-based type. I'm just going to say revenue, cost, and then revenue again, and then put in my formula. So I just have the fields in here. Do a quick calculation to show that we can create data. And we're going to do a percent of gross margin. If I click OK, hopefully that works. And here we go. And again, back to the data type, it thinks it's just a text field. I want to change this to a percentage. And now we have a nice data model. It's going to populate the model from and create some data for us. So let's do that. You go to home. I'm going to click load. I'm going to click close and load too because I want to choose where this goes. Now I can make this go into the sheet and populate the sheet, right? And, but the sheets have limitations. The worksheets, about 1 million rows, and then you start airing out. And if you really want this to be an ongoing process, like we're going to show you here in a second, you don't really want to populate the sheet. You want to populate the data model. And again, Alex will show you a little bit more about the data model on the Power BI side, but I'm just going to populate this to show you a little bit what you can do with it without even touching Power BI. So we're going to load that. We can see it populating our steps, and it processed about 100 rows of sales data for us. Now, we talked about Power Query being able to automate things for you, and that's part of the power here, is that we went through this process once, and now we can continue using it. And again, I've used this in the real world, this exact scenario where somebody was running reports out of a system we couldn't connect to, and we could, though, run those reports and export them to Excel and save them into a directory, and then it would populate our model for more analysis. And we've done this before. So what I want to show you real quick is the data model. Now my data model is really simple. It's just one table. Alex will show you a little more complicated one. I'm clicking on the data view or the diagram view, and this is just really the different pieces of data. Now this, again, this is a database within Excel. You used to have to build these large database structures and data warehouses for this to work. But on an SMB scale, you can load this data model and really get some benefit out of dashboarding even at this level. And I'll kind of show you what we can do here. But let's show the automation piece real quick. So I just closed the data model, and I want to bring back my sales. That might be tempting fate here. I'm just going to drag in another file of 1,000 rows into import data. Again, now this is just another sheet. Again, with that idea that if I was running a report and I export it to Excel, I just save it to the same location. This could be a SharePoint folder in the cloud too. So if I minimize this, I can just go hit refresh data, and you'll see down here, with a little luck, now we have 1,100 rows. Okay, so we were able to, without going through that whole process again, we were able to update the data model. So now the question is what can we do with that? Well, we can do a couple of little things to start to create some dashboarding. And so I'm going to go into the data model. I'm going to select the pivot table, and I'll just do a quick pivot table. There we go. And I'll just say new worksheet and select the pivot table. So I have the data on my right-hand side here, and this is the columns within my data. So I'll select region and maybe gross margin. Let's report on what region has the best gross margin, right? So we can kind of start to play with our data and get some insight into what the data is telling us. I can go back into the data model really quick and do a chart. And again, just kind of select some of that data that I was looking for, and maybe I want to do, again, by region, maybe. Try that again, there we go. And maybe this time I want to do revenue. And so now I have a nice little chart. This is the old way of dashboarding, but you can still use it, and it's still very useful. But a more modern way of dashboarding is now leveraging some of these tools like the data model and Power Query that are now inside of Power BI and really start to go through some of that visualization. So I think I'm going to pass it over now to Alex and have him start to go through some of that more modern visualization.
Brandon, there were just a couple questions that popped up
fantastic.
during the presentation. So one of them was around the type of data that can be pulled in and transformed. All Office products were able to do that, but the question was, are you able to do outside generated sources as well? So anything outside of the Microsoft products?
So,
such as like a website or
right,
your CRM.
Okay. Yeah. And so you can connect to nearly anything. And here, I'll even show you really quick back to here. We can connect to a PDF, and that kind of blows my mind. You can connect to a PDF and pull data from that, right? You can connect to, if this was going to be maybe an AWS database in the cloud, right? You can connect to that. There's connectors for that. If you're going to connect to, you can connect to a website specifically. Down here, online services, other services. You can connect and I've seen people do this with, and not really work related, but fantasy football. They'll connect to a stats site and pull them in and start to analyze those stats. That's way more dedication than I have, but I've seen that happen. So yes, the list is very huge and not just isolated to Microsoft.
Awesome. And then the second question that came through was about data transformation. Can it convert exported time data with embedded Z's and T's into actual date and time values without having to do all the data massaging?
Yeah, so it can do some of that. Yeah, it does some pretty interesting things with when you're pulling that transform. You're just walking through those steps. So anything that you would do manually, you can pretty much do with the Power Query. The other nice thing too is that our data was pretty clean, just for demo purposes. But if the data isn't clean and if there's maybe a number of columns smashed together, or there's maybe call it an ID of some sort, and each section of the ID has a meaning and you want to separate that out, you can actually separate that into other columns during that transform.
Awesome. And then Brandon, I think I'll start presenting, and if you want to pop into the Q&A pod, and if there's another question that you can just kind of reply to,
yep.
And I'll switch over here.
Happy to answer. Let me just stop sharing. There we go.
Hi, everybody. Hang on a second here. I'm just going to share my screen, and then all right. So to introduce myself, my name is Alex Hapka. I'm the Business Integrations Analyst for Success, and I'm here to go over Power BI, and I'm hoping to pull you along the journey of the experience, to experience how easy it is to assemble your visualizations. And hopefully I'll be able to provide a few tips how to take your report just a bit further. But before we dive in, I do want to start by letting you know about the why behind Power BI and a couple of things to keep in mind when doing your data modeling. So why would you want to use Power BI? Well, it's very easy to use. A lot of the mechanics within Power BI you'll find within a lot of Microsoft products. So if you are familiar with Microsoft products like Excel, like Word, like PowerPoint, a lot of those different ways of manipulating things there can also be used in Power BI as well. The other thing is that once you upload your data, you do have a lot of data modeling and getting it ready to go to be put into Power BI. You can certainly do that. But Power BI has its own intelligence in the background that it can pick up on what kind of data and make assumptions about it right off the bat, and you'd be able to start visualization right away. Obviously, we want to make sure that it also understands the relationships between the tables, and that's a big part of it. But if it's a quick report that you need to put together, you can upload data and start visualizing right away. The other thing is that it's a part of the Power Platform, which is Power Automate, Power Apps, Power BI that we're talking about, and Power Virtual Agents. And this means that it's very seamless in the connectivity between those four programs. And the example I like to use is that let's say that you have a report that's showing off the customer reviews as they're coming through, and you're gauging it by a certain percentage of satisfaction. You have a threshold of maybe 80% that you want to hit at all times. You could use Power Automate to keep an eye on that percentage of satisfaction. And if it hits below that threshold, you could have an email notification sent out to your marketing department, for example, to do a follow-up and see what kind of marketing we can do or how we can increase the satisfaction. Another thing is that it's interactive right out of the box. So after you make visualizations, the beauty of Power BI is that it draws these connections and relationships between the different data sources. So when you do put these visualizations onto the blank canvas right away, if you were to select a single metric within a bar graph, the other visualizations will filter according to your selection. So that's what I think is a very powerful part of Power BI, is that you can do a next level of data analysis without having to make a total separate report for that one metric. And we'll kind of look at that too through the demo. The other thing is that reports and dashboards, they can be published to the cloud and they can be shared and collaborated with other Power BI Pro users. That's kind of a licensing thing once you get to the internet, but regardless of it, you do have that option to have a workspace online and be able to collaborate. This helps with versioning as well. So if you're working on a report and you sent it to somebody else, that's a separate version that got sent to them, and then you started working on the same one that you had. You could potentially be making corrections here, and then they send you back their corrections. It gets into a big mess. So, yeah, that's another great thing about using Power BI. So some things to keep in mind when you're looking at putting together a report. I just wanted to call these out. When you're looking at data analysis, the first thing to keep in mind is really give yourself a break. It's an iterative process. You're going to start simple, you're going to start small, and you're going to probably go down a certain path. And you're going to find out maybe a couple days down that path that this is not going to stay true to the message that you want to show within your report. And that's okay. And you can look at that and figure out what worked, what didn't, keep the things that worked, take away the things that didn't, and then start over. Do not give up and just keep at it and keep exploring. Another thing that Brandon and I like to mention is try mocking up the dashboard and playing with the data before you bring it into Power BI. And this is going to help you formulate just kind of a rough look of what the dashboard would look like. I've seen people use whiteboards. They've used cocktail napkins at their restaurants when they're talking with their friends. Or you can use Excel to be able to do that as well. Just to play around the data and just really dial in on that message you want to get across. And the reason behind that is then you're not uploading too much data, and now you have too much noise in the background that would probably slow down the performance of Power BI and create a bigger file size than needed. It really dials in on that. The other thing that you would want to keep in mind is learning about the calendar table. So a calendar table is kind of a best practice within the Power BI community. And what it does is every business has a different way that they describe time. And Power BI, right off the bat, when you're uploading any sort of date metrics or time metrics, it goes off the basic ones that it assumes a lot of people want to use, which is year, month, day, and quarter. But sometimes people use calendar year or they use fiscal year. Or maybe you want to label time differently. Maybe instead of labeling it as this specific date, you want to see how many times did we sell something on Sunday. You can have the calendar table ready to give you all those different customizable labels that you want to use for your business. And so if you just search on Google or if you search on Internet Explorer for how to create a calendar table, there's plenty of videos that are able to show you how to do that. And there's also some templates out there that you can upload into Power BI to automatically generate it for you. The other thing to keep in mind with the calendar table is it actually helps decrease the size of your file. So when you make a visualization and you pull in a date metric just from a table, what it's going to do is it's going to create that calendar table behind that one visualization. And that's okay with just one visualization. But imagine if you had 3 other ones doing that same thing behind each of the visualizations. What that's going to do is it's going to bog down your report. So having a calendar table is great because you're referencing the table and you're not creating a new one behind the visualization. So that's just a little pro tip for you. Definitely take a look out there and search for that. The last thing that we have on here to keep in mind is to make sure that you're documenting your findings. So as you're creating your report, try to document the different measures that you do, also why you chose a certain visualization. And this will actually help if the report actually gets passed off to somebody else and they have to continue the creation process. The other reasoning is that if you're doing reports, you might be doing multiple reports, 6 or 7 of them at a time. And if somebody asks you about the first report you ever made, if you don't have those documented findings, it's going to be really hard to dig through the Power BI to refresh your memory of why you did certain things. So having that documentation will actually help with that. And I'll go a little bit more into that a little bit later. So yeah, with that, I'm going to go ahead and dive into an example, unless there's any questions that might be out there, Vanessa or Brandon.
No new questions right now.
Awesome. All right. So this looks daunting at first. Don't be afraid. This is just an example of what Power BI can do for you. So what I'm doing here is I'm using some dummy data that we downloaded from Microsoft. Don't worry about the numbers, but I want you to pay attention to the way that it's formulated and the way that they have the report. So you see all of our data sources or our data metrics are on the right-hand side. And this is after you upload the data like Brandon was showing. And I'll get a little bit further into that when we actually start developing the Power BI. I just want to show you the example here. So this has all the different data that we have. And if you notice, they have a couple of bar graphs here. They have a line graph here, total of net sales. But really take note how simplified and finite it is. It's only focusing on one message, which is what are our net sales? It doesn't have anything extra out there that it's trying to look at, but there's different ways that we can describe the net sales based off of the different visualizations. The other thing to keep it simplified and to utilize the real estate that you have is they're using something called a button feature. So if we were to look at this store breakdown here, right now it's a bar graph, but if I were to click on the map here, it actually changes the visualization into a geographical look of the hot spots of the net sales. And so the easiest way to think about this is when we're looking at the report, it looks like it's 2D, but if we were to flip it on its side, it actually has visualizations that are overlapping, and the buttons are bookmarks that switch these visualizations as need be. To show you kind of the interactivity that you're able to do within Power BI right out of the box, if I were to click on this Power BI metric here for the category, the moment that I click it, the other visualizations change to whatever metric that I clicked. And this is very helpful of bringing that next level of data analysis. The idea behind it is that instead of having to go and make a separate report that talks specifically about Power BI and their net sales, we can include that in the same report. And then the audience or the reader is able to interact with it to look at the data that they want to look at. The other very powerful visualization is over here. This is called the Q&A pod. So the readers and the audience can actually ask questions about the data and then get a result in the visualization. So for example, I wrote down here, let's say I wanted to know what is the variance of the net sales. So if I type in net sales variance, it's going to go ahead and show me what that net sales variance is, which in this case is 19K for the category of Power BI. So if I were to click this again, you'll notice that it shows us now the net sales variance is 163,000. And if you don't really know what you're looking for, that's okay too, because if I were to take this out, it actually gives you suggestions. And this is kind of the intellectual part of Power BI. On the background is that it's looking at all your data and it's thinking up quick insights of what they think would be interesting for you to see. So then you can actually click any of these. Now, because this is dummy data, it might not work the way that we'd want it to do. But if I were to click, let me see if I can find one quick here. So if I want to look at the products sorted by product image, I don't know why you would want to look at that, but it's an example that they have for suggestion. You'll notice that it turned it into a table that we can look at, and we can see all the product images that they have. So this kind of answers also that question of, it looks like it's a lot of quantifiable data, but you can really do other data sources such as like JPEGs as well, if it's referencing a certain folder within your OneDrive, SharePoint, or wherever you're pointing it to, and then be able to use those product images within your actual report. An example would be if I were to hover over this, you'll see this tooltip pops up. And within there, it's showing me the image of the skateboard for this specific example. Any questions so far? I'm trying not to go too fast, but there's so much to do and so little time to do it in, as Willy Wonka would say.
So far, you're good.
Okay. Feel free to ask any questions as we go along, and like Brandon said, we'll probably have some Q&A time at the very end here. So I'm going to go ahead and switch over to my blank slate here. So this is a blank slate with the data already uploaded. So to show you how easy it is to get your data in here, it's similar to what Brandon was talking about, and to kind of tie it into what he was talking about. We have that same get data function here. I'm going to go ahead and click this, and I think it'll actually answer some of the questions about what data sources you're able to connect to. So if you see here, these are all the types of data sources that you can connect to. And it ranges from anywhere on difficulty of something beginner like an Excel file or a folder, all the way down to something even more advanced, which could be like a blank query. That's straight coding. That's where that is. They have all these different connectors is what they're called for different programs, such as like SurveyMonkey. You can tap into that if you wanted to. And I think Salesforce is in here somewhere as well. Same with Spark. And this is just the all section. If you can't find what you're looking for here, you can also go into the different types of data that you want to pull in, such as a file, a database. You can do SQL Server here. You got your Power Platform, which leverages the Common Data Service. And then you've also got your Azure. This is where you would see that website where it'll actually read the website and bring in data. Given there's permissions involved there as well. So those are the different ways that you're able to get the data. And once you pull that in, you can transform the data from there. Otherwise, you're able to transform the data if you were to click on this icon under the home section. And that would actually pull up that Power Query Editor that Brandon was talking about with all the data already placed in here. And you're able to manipulate this data. It's the same thing as what he was talking about, where you're able to highlight and change the different types of data. For that question of date and time, you're able to do that here. You're also able to make it just date or just time. You can do it by time zone or duration. Like there's all these different ways to manipulate the data. And the reason why it's important to look into that is what you're doing is you're giving Power BI the knowledge to understand what this data is so it can make those connections that we were talking about. The perfect example that I like to use is something as simple as an order number. So when you first pull an order number column into Power BI, it thinks it's a whole number, but that's not really what it is. An order number is the name of the order. So you got to make sure that Power BI understands that by making it a text instead. So it doesn't feel like it needs to sum it up or divide it or average it. And of course, after you make all of these changes, and you can transform the data however you like, you can hit close and apply. And keep in mind that once you do it in here, it's not end all be all. You can change these as you go along as well. And then you can use the language of Power BI DAX to manipulate the data a little bit further. And I'll go a little bit further into that as well. So now let's get into actually making the visualizations. This is the fun part. This is the designing part. This is what everybody is excited for. Let's say I just want to know what the total sales are, just a straight number of total sales, and start small, you know, and that's a big thing, is to make sure that you start small when you're creating a report, and then ask questions that will make it a little bit more complicated. And I'll show you how that works as well. So if I go to the sales table and I select this amount, this is what we're going to want to pull into the visualization. I can do this a couple of different ways. Either I can hover over each of these visualizations to figure out which one I want to use. In this case, I want to use a card because I just want to show the number. I click that, brings in the visualization, and either I can drag this amount into the fields, which would then give us the full number into the visualization, or I can click drag, just like PowerPoint. Boom, there it is, 439,000 for the total sales. The other thing that you can do, if let's say I didn't know I could do that, you could simply just drag the metric into the blank canvas, and Power BI will actually figure out what visualization will work best and send it to you. Of course, we don't want the bar graph, we wanted the card. That's what we wanted. So with it highlighted, I can just click card and it'll modify the visualization based off of what we have in the field. And I can do that for all these different visualizations, figuring out which one would be best. So let's say that you don't see a visualization that fits your message and what you want to look at. That's okay, no sweat. So the Power BI community creates a lot of custom visualizations that they then upload into a place to be able to download them. Microsoft approves a lot of them, make sure they work before it actually gets posted. But if you go to these 3 dots here, you can actually get more visuals. And so if I were to select that, hopefully it'll pop up really quick. But it's going to bring you to essentially a store that has both free and premium visualizations that you can utilize. And a lot of the community has been very creative with creating these different visualizations. And you can select any of them to bring into your Power BI desktop. With the same thing with get the data, you have your different categories. So if there's something specific that you wanted to answer, like your infographics or your KPIs, you can select that and it'll give you just the visualizations that speak to that specific category. I would recommend trying to use a lot of the outside of the box visualizations first, because as you pull in these custom visualizations, it does take up more space on the file. And so just to keep that in mind as you're looking at them. Okay, so we got our total sales, but let's say I want to see the total sales throughout the month. And then all this data is within the month of June. Well, for that, I can select the visualization I want, which in this case, I want to have just a clustered column chart, as it's called. And right now, it's just showing me the value, which is the sum amount of the total sales. That's where this calendar table can come into play here. I've already flushed it out. So in here, I've actually created a calendar table, and I can show you within the data here. This is what a calendar table it is. All of these are based off of date. So all you have to do is you upload your date, and then with DAX, you're actually able to create the different ways that you want to describe time. Month, name, long, I want to know what month, maybe the day of the week. What is the name of the day of the week? What quarter is it? Like, these are all things to think about when building out your calendar table. And from there, you can actually grab each of these metrics and pull them into the axis. So let's say we wanted to know by quarter. I'll go ahead and pull it into the axis here. It's Q2 because it's June. So we're only going to have the data for June. That's not very effective. Let's say that I want to know what's the day of the week, right? Let's see here. I want to do the day of the week. It's the number. And then this, I believe, is the name. So Sunday, that's when a lot of our total sales were. It's dummy data, take it for what it is. We can also just pull in the date as well. And then that's going to create a hierarchy of the date, which this is what I was talking about. If we just did date, it would build that calendar table behind it of year, quarter, month, and day. So of course I can X out anything that I don't want to use. I just want to see the days. So I can go ahead and X out quarter, I'll X out the month. And then what it's doing is numbered days. So day 2, we did 120,000, day 9, 64,000. So that's a way to be able to modify. And of course, you're able to modify it even more, because let's say these look pretty generic. Amount by day, that looks pretty generic. And like I said before with the Microsoft products, if you understand them, you're going to feel right at home, because we have this paintbrush icon. And the paintbrush icon, what it does is it allows you to modify the visualizations. So I want to change that title. Put on the title here, I can go ahead and just say, okay, I want total sales by day. It automatically does it in real time. I can go down here, maybe I want to make it more brand specific. So I can click this, it'll make it a different color. The background, I could change that too if I wanted to. I don't really like that. You know, it's all like messing around with it and being able to make it what you want it to be. Go ahead and select that. I can increase the text size just so it's a little bit bigger. The other thing that you can do here, you've got all these different areas to modify. Another thing that you can think about is data labels. If you were to click that on, you'll notice that it gives me the totals of each of those bar graphs. That to me looks good. I think we can make it look a little bit better. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to display the units as auto, which is taken 1,000. And I'm going to do the orientation as vertical. Okay, that looks pretty good, but I think I want it to be inside of the bar graphs. And it looks a little small. Maybe I can pump that up just a little bit. So these are different ways of being able to modify. And just like PowerPoint, you can modify, you can move it around. It has the guided dotted lines to center certain visualizations that you want to look at. All right, awesome. So I've said the total sales. I've asked the question of, well, you know, I want to see it by day, but what if I want to see it by store? I want to know each of the total sales by store. Based off of our relationships that we've set up, which I'm just going to show you a quick snapshot of here. This is the data model that Brandon was talking about. It's a little bit more complicated than what he had, but you'll notice that we've developed these relationships of a one-to-one or a one-to-many. That way Power BI knows how each of the tables interact with each other, and then it can automatically modify the visualizations according to what you want. So if I want to know by store, we can do that too. Why don't we go ahead and do that? If I come down to the store table here, we have the store metric. I'll drag this in here. It's going to give me that store names in a table form, and that interactivity right out of the box. So if I wanted to look at FAMA specifically, I can click that, and you'll notice that everything else modifies according to FAMA, including our bar graphs, which show us the total amount of 120,000, but it looks like FAMA only did 12,000 of that in this day 2. But maybe I want to be able to have that total sales of each store just available for people to see. We can take the different tables and the different metrics and we can combine them because of the relationships that we set up. So I can go ahead and set this in here, and now we can see the amount and the name of the store. Maybe I want it to be a little bit more presentational. I know someone that I've worked with that loves pie charts. So I'll go ahead and put pie charts in here. That's the audience that's going to be looking at this. I can modify it a little bit bigger. And again, the same thing. You can click anywhere and be able to modify accordingly. Before I move on, is there any questions that have popped up? Feel free to stop me if there has been.
So far, no questions.
Okay. I must be hitting home on a lot of this stuff. All right. So the next question is I know my total sales. I know what it is by day. The amount by store is right here. Fantastic. But let's say I want to know, what is the average sale that we run into? Well, I don't have that metric over in the data set that I have created. I need to create that. And that's where the language of DAX comes into play. Now, if you've worked in Excel and you're very familiar with Excel, what DAX does is it takes the similar thought process of those Excel calculations and actually applies it to mashing up the data and doing data modeling. Power Query within Excel also uses DAX. So if you're familiar with Power Query, it's the same language within Power BI desktop or within Power BI. So yeah, when you're in here, when you do DAX, you're going to create a new measure. And for this instance, we just want to know what the average is. So to do that, I want to select the table that I want this measure to be in and click this new measure. Let it do its little thinking thing, and then there we go. In the white space, you'll see here measure 2. That's because there's another measure within the data set that says just measure, so that's why it says measure 2. But anything before the equal sign is going to be the name of the measure, and anything afterwards will be your actual equation. So I'm going to go ahead and we're just going to call this average sales. And it's important to make sure that you label it accordingly and document. And that this is why, because you're going to be doing a ton of measures to be able to get the right visualization that you're looking at. So for that, we're going to use the average function, just like in Excel. And you can see, just like a Google search, it's going ahead and showing you and trying to understand, is this what you want to look for? For us, we want to go to sales, and we want the amount. Now, if you look at this specifically, the way that it's laid out is it's actually telling Power BI where you want it to go to do the average. And the thing to think about and change your mindset with when it comes to DAX is that when you're doing a formula in Excel, that's done cell by cell. So if you do it in one cell, you need to copy and paste into another cell, so forth and so on. DAX looks at that and says, I can work a little bit faster than that. And it actually does column by column and row by row. So when you do a DAX formula to make a new column, for instance, it's going to apply that to every row within your data. If you're doing a measure, it's going to do the measure based off of the column that you point it to. So in this instance, we want Power BI to average in the sales table the column of amount. And those brackets there means the column. And so if I were to go ahead and put a parentheses there and select enter, it's going to go ahead and make our measure. So I already made one here, you see, but I have the second one, which is average sales. And then just like any other metric, I can grab it, pull it, and now it's going to make that assumption of a bar graph. I want it to be a card. I think that would be great. You'll notice that once you make a measure, it's a whole new number to Power BI, and it might not completely understand what you want to define it as. So right now, it's only looking at it as a whole number, but we actually want it to be monetary. So to do that, like I said, you're able to modify all of the data types and everything like that further along in the report. You don't have to just do it in the transform data, because when you select it, you'll see it up here. You've got the name of it, which you can change at any point. You've got the table that it's in. You can change that as well. Maybe you don't want it in the sales. Maybe you want it to be in the analysis DAX that's located all the way up here. I can go ahead and select that, and now it'll move it. Now it's located in my analysis DAX. The format of it, right now it's in general because it didn't really know what you wanted it to be, but I can click it here to change it to whatever I would want it to be. And in this instance, I want it to be the dollar English currency. So if I select that, it'll go ahead and modify it. And then it also kept the 2 decimal places. And that I can change too. You know, maybe somebody doesn't like decimals. Maybe they want it to be just a flat whole number. We can select that and it'll round up accordingly. So let's see here. We've got the total sales. We got the sales by day, amount by store.
Is this a good time for a question?
Sure.
So Michael's asking, since the data is dynamic, is there a way to take a snapshot of the data at a given time that can be gone back to or compared to other snapshots?
Yes. So there is a way to be able to do that, and it's called bookmarks, and we're going to get into that right next. So thank you for that question. It's a great way to transition into that. Are there any other questions before I move on? Because that's actually my next thing I'm going to be talking about.
Nope, that was it.
All right. I just want to make sure that everything is where. Okay. We did all that. Awesome. And like I said, just like in PowerPoint, you're able to modify it accordingly. And if I wanted to, I can add borders or shadows to make it pop just a little bit more. Just like that. All right, so to the question that was asked about taking a snapshot, that's what's called a bookmark. And I'm going to be going into buttons, which actually talks about bookmarks as well. So for example, if I wanted the snapshot to be of a specific day, I want it to be of this day, the 30th day of the total sales. If I were to go to view and actually do selection pane and the bookmark pane, the reason why I'm bringing both of these up is that you're able to hide using the selection pane, or you can select different visualizations. But in this instance, we want to create a bookmark of this data, which we would select add bookmark, and then actually rename it 30-day total sales. So what you're able to do is then to bookmark it. So when you select it, it'll actually bring it through, and we actually want the data to stay the same. So if we were to select this, it'll keep that as well. So that's a way to be able to put a bookmark in. And these bookmarks, anybody who has access to the report that's not in reader view actually has access to the bookmarks. But let's say you want them to actually be able to just click on a button to make this happen. Well, that's something you can do as well. In the insert tab here, you'll notice that you have the button option to insert a button, which can be any of these selections, or you can do a blank button and put it over a text box, and then that's another way to label it. But let's say I just want it to be the I here for information, pops it in, and right now, this button does nothing at the moment. Hang on a second here. I'm going to minimize these so I can expand it out. Right now, this button does nothing. I hold Control and I click on it. There's no action associated with it. But when I highlight it and I bring out the visualizations, I'm able to do an action and add to it. So if I were to go ahead and select the bookmark, you do 30-day totals. So when I unhighlight it, I hover over it, and let's just click out of this. Oh, it's like it didn't bookmark the thing. So that would be how you would be able to have interactivity with the reader or the audience member. I'm going to double check and I'll send Vanessa a more finite answer around being able to do by certain data sources. You can certainly do it if you have a slicer, which is your filter, and then be able to slice the data accordingly and then bookmark the way that the slicer is placed. In my example that I was doing, I was going to hide the amount store. So when you see the finished product, you'll see that that's where my button is, and it'll have two bookmarks, which is hidden and visible. And to hide, you can do that within the selection pane by clicking this hide visual button and bring it back. So now that we've kind of gone through that a little bit, is there any other questions around that at all, Brandon or Vanessa?
We have one question here that is, I'm guessing you can drill into the specific information in either tool, meaning if I wanted to see what sales accounted for the Contoso sales, can I just double click on that part of the pie chart?
Yes, so that's more of an advanced technique called drill through. It does have that option to do cross report, where when you click something, it'll bring you to another tab that has the information that you're looking for. Otherwise, to filter out accordingly within the same visualization, you can click on Contoso, and it'll give you all of the information that you're looking for? That's a great question. If there's a different way that you want to be able to interpret this information, you can put it into another tab, or in the instance, the advanced technique of a tooltip, if you had another tab that had the information, and then the tooltip itself pulls that filtered information to show you. Is there any other ones?
Nope, that's it.
Awesome. So now we have a few visualizations, and I've kind of shown you how easy it is to pull things in. Now, these are a lot of the basic things that can be done right outside the box. And it does bring up a good point, especially when we were looking at the example previously. I would recommend trying to learn something new every single day if you can. If you have the time to, taking 5 minutes, there's plenty of bite-sized content on YouTube that you can literally ask, can Power BI do this within YouTube? And there's plenty of videos or documents that you can reference to learn how to do some of those advanced techniques. And so the more that you learn, the more Power BI will actually open up. I don't want to dig too deep into those advanced techniques just because this is supposed to be kind of a high-level overview of how easy it is to assemble your reports. And it could be something that would be a presentation at a different time. But definitely, just take a look and try to learn, as much as you can about Power BI. There's also bite-sized videos that talk about how to improve your report functionality, how to allow it to move faster, something as simple as a file size. How do I decrease that so it doesn't take up so much area within my storage? The other thing, aside from analyzing the data, is that you want to know the flow of your report. And the big thing with that is to really learn the audience of who's going to be looking at this report. The audience that you're looking at might use a different language. They might, again, to that example of the calendar table, they might think in calendar years, but your company thinks in fiscal years. Well, if you're talking to someone that thinks in calendar year and you're showing them fiscal years, they might be able to derive to a conclusion about it, but really speaking to the audience's language will actually help them achieve that message. Because your goal at the end should be that this report can speak for itself without needing to have you there. The other thing that I thought was an interesting little pro tip that I learned is that a lot of times when you're looking at either a document or book, or depending on the culture, you're starting off by reading from left to right and from top to bottom. So there was this philosophy that was written out in a small article that spoke around that and how to apply it to reports. And with that mentality in mind, you probably want the biggest data point that's just going to pinpoint the message in the upper left-hand corner. So when someone comes in, they can look at that, like for this, it's the total sales, 439,000 for the total sales of June. Fantastic. Okay, then they can start asking the questions. Maybe your story goes on into the same way that we were asking questions of the data and saying that total sales by day. That is another one. That's the next chapter in my message, in my story that I'm trying to tell. So maybe I move that over here. And then after that, I want to know the amount of the store. I might want to place that down here just to kind of give us this circular motion of going down. But at the end of the day, having the most finite information be placed up here. And I'm going to show you just the end result that I have already created here. So the reason why I put it this way is that we have the total sales amount in the upper left-hand corner, like I said, the moment you go on here. And then I have the average sale. That was the question that I felt was good for my message. And then from there, I have the total sales amount by day. But then you notice that I don't have the stores here. Well, if they want to know the stores, they can go ahead and click this button. And now it changes everything to be total by stores. So it's a way to be able to utilize the same real estate and not take up too much of it and not make it too busy and keep it very simplistic. So we have all the visualizations where we need it to be. And now we want to publish it. I'm not going to go too much into publishing, just because once we publish it to the cloud, I mean, there's all these different parts to that aspect of it. But for this presentation, I'll show you where it's located. So then once you click publish, it'll ask you which workspace do you want it to be. I'm gonna go ahead and save these changes, even though I didn't make any, but I think it's because I clicked the button. And hopefully it'll go quickly. If not, I can just go over it. Awesome. So with every license, you have a My Workspace that you get developed with once you get the license, whether you're free, Power BI Pro, or services. The difference is the collaboration and sharing, you have to be at the Power BI Pro license. So I have a demo team workspace that I want to upload this to. Go ahead and click select. Now I've already uploaded it, so it actually asks me, hey, you already have a data set that's labeled finished report. Do you want to just overwrite that one? In this case, yes, because it's the same report. But if it was a different one, I'd have to go back and rename it something differently. Go ahead and click replace. And it's going to go ahead and publish. Success, it's there. Once I'm there, I can click this to actually go to the website, but I already have it open. So I'm just gonna hop over to there right now. And so this is what you would see within your Office 365. If you go up to these apps, you'll see all the apps that you have available, and you can click on Power BI to get there. And then once there, you'll see the different workspaces that you can work with. In this instance, I'm looking at the demo team, and it pulls it up here. And you'll see that it brings up your report. It'll show you the type, and it also brings up the data set. And this is really great with collaboration, because if the data set's already made and you make it into one that's shareable, then you can actually share it with your other reports and not have to do that data modeling consistently all the time and redo it for each report. You can actually connect it to multiple reports. So I'm gonna go ahead and click the finish report, and this is what it would look like if you were to share it with somebody else. So we have our total sales here, and if you'll notice, we've got the button, and that seems to work perfectly. And it has that interactivity we were talking about. So that's how easy it is to kind of put together these different reports. So before I wrap up with the 5 key things, is there any questions out there that I can try to answer?
No questions as of now.
All right. So Brandon and I boiled down this whole presentation into 5 key things to really think about and to keep in mind, and we want you to take away with. Aside from the demo and learning how to put things into the visualizations, these are things to keep in mind when you're putting together these reports or doing any sort of data modeling. Number 1 is to know what you're creating before you jump in. It comes back to that mock-up thing. We can't stress it enough. It's really easy to get lost in the data, especially when you throw it all in the Power BI and you're trying to figure out what metrics you want to use. It's sometimes easier to ask the questions of the data outside of Power BI, because it'll also help you with the file size and the performance of the actual report. Because at the end of the day, if you're not using certain data within the data set, you shouldn't have it visible within the report. It's just going to slow it down. Number 2 is to keep in mind to be clear and to keep the simplicity in mind. Some big key call outs here is to make sure that your metrics are not only geared towards your audience, but they don't change throughout the report. You don't want to start with dollars, and unless the message is what is the yen conversion of dollars, you wouldn't want to switch to yen in another visualization just speaking about total sales, unless that is the audience that you're looking to utilize. Number 2 is under there is to know the story of what your report is telling you. And then, of course, this is a really good one, is ask yourself, what course of action in my company does this data drive? And that's really speaking to your company and the message you're trying to get across. And what is the end result when you're showing this data? What do you want it to achieve? Is something to keep in mind. Number 3 is to be okay with working iteratively. Give yourself a break. Learn your audience and adapt accordingly because your audience will change. Your message, try to stay close to the message or story, but that could change too, and that's okay. Just be okay with getting dirty and working iteratively because it's only going to evolve the report to what it's needed for. Start small. We did that in our demo. We started with just the total sales. That's all we looked at. And then we moved into asking questions of by store, by the day, but start small and then start to work your way out there. This is another thing that I didn't touch on too much in my demo, but it's knowing what type of dashboard you are making. And this is the different types of dashboards or data analysis that we could look at, which is either descriptive, proscriptive, or predictive. And the difference of that is with descriptive, you're looking at what you've already done. Proscriptive is what you are about to do. And then predictive, this one is a little hazy on me, but the idea is that you're trying to predict based off of different elements in the future of what could happen. And that's just kind of a brief overview of that. Definitely take a look into that. You can search about the different types of data modeling. And number 4 here, we said this again, I'm gonna say this again, is the documentation. Just make sure you do that. You can leverage Teams for that too. That's something that I do, is I actually start a meeting with myself and I record it, and I record what I figured out and how I solved a certain problem, and then I store that video in a folder. That's one way you can go about doing it. You can also document within a Word document or an Excel document and upload that into a folder. If you're working with a team, you can actually upload it into their file structure so that anybody within that team can look at what's already been worked on. The other thing that we found is a site called rapiddocs.com, and it's been very helpful where you upload the template of your Power BI and it actually will, it actually will take in the template and then give you a page documentation very neatly presented of all the different relationships you have, all the different DAX measures that you use, the different visualizations and how they interact with each other. So it's a lot more information than you'll probably need, but odds are you can ask your questions about your report within that document and it can give you the answer and refresh your memory. Number 5, learn something new every day. Definitely look into DAX. Get to know DAX. If you've worked with Excel, it's pretty easy to pick up. Learn how to create a calendar table. And then we have a couple links in here of some self-guided learnings within the Microsoft structure, or Microsoft website, that I can actually take you through Power BI for you to learn it. The other thing is the great bite-sized videos throughout YouTube. We do recommend this Guy in a Cube YouTube channel. They specialize in Power BI and they do a lot of 5-minute videos just talking about their experiences with their clients where they'll come with a problem and then these guys actually solve it. And so a lot of times those solutions are probably something that you're looking into yourself. So check them out if you ever have any questions about Power BI, and that's another way to learn as well. And that's it for me. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing here. Awesome. Is there any questions? We have a little time for Q&A, I believe, about 10 minutes.
No questions in the chat right now.
Okay.
Give people a couple moments to.
Yeah, we can give everyone a couple of minutes to send in some questions, or you can always reach out to us in an email if you have any follow-up questions. This event, as a reminder, was recorded and will be distributed in a post-event email. We'll also include some other resources that you can dive into to get you started with Power BI. So if we have no more questions, I'm going to sign off. I hope everyone has a great rest of their day. Thank you again for joining, and we hope to see you at our next virtual event. Bye, everyone.